Hey guys, this is Nick here with What Game Now, and you may notice the audio sounds a heck of a lot better. That's because I've upgraded my headset, and I've also got some stuff going on in the background for you guys to watch. In this case, it's a video game. If you're curious, it's called Warzone 2100. It's actually available as a free download. Anyway, today's topic that I want to cover is a new miniature game that's coming out that I'm really excited for, and that is Warcaster Neo Mechanika by Privateer Press. And what this is Privateer Press is coming out with a brand new full-scale miniatures game. So this is not a skirmish game. It depends what you define as skirmish, but it's more than 10 models. It's between 20 and 25 models for the most part. And it's set actually in their War Machine universe as a sci-fi game. And it's coming out, they actually ran it through Kickstarter, which caused a little bit of controversy. And the reason why they gave as to why they went to Kickstarter is basically there's so many miniature games coming out nowadays that it's kind of hard for retailers and distributors to justify picking up a new product until they can illustrate that there is a market for it. And they decided that going Kickstarter would be their best option, which I can understand. Some of the issues that Privateer Press has with that are their own. You know, some of the retailer hesitation is Privateer Press's fault. But, you know, hey, they did this. They also did a pretty serious retail pledge for it. Anyway, aside from all that, let's go ahead and talk about the game itself and why personally I'm very excited for it. First off, let's give you guys the sales pitch. This is set in the same universe as War Machine, but it's set 5,000 years in the future. War Machine right now is undergoing it's not an end times level event, but it's a world changing event. The best way to describe it, if you're familiar with 40K, would be like the splitting of the Imperium through the Calatrix Maledictum or something like that. It's a major event that's changing the world, but it's not ending it. And as part of this, a cult in the War Machine universe called the Convergence of Cirrus basically decided that, well, a chunk of them decided and took over the cult and decided that they needed to evacuate as much of humanity as possible from the planet. And they did. And the way they did that was through stargates, basically. They built a giant stargate and sent people through it to other worlds. And the stargate had actually been given to the tech for the stargate had actually been given to them by their goddess, which is a whole part of that lore. Anyway, Warcaster Neo Mechanika picks up 5,000 years later in a completely different galaxy. Magic is gone. The people here have forgotten magic. Magic doesn't exist. Although there is something that could give magic-like results, but it's this world that has spawned from this exodus. And currently there are 3 factions. There's implied to be a 4th one on the way. And like I said, they launched it through Kickstarter, and they've got releases up through probably the end of this year already on the docket. So, how does this work? And a little bit about the game before we get going. Warcaster Neo Mechanika is an alternating activation game system. The game is played as a series of what are called pulse rounds. There's usually 3 of them in a game. And then there's between, I think it's 5 and 7 turns in each pulse round. And during each turn, you can activate 2 units from your army. Units are the catch-all term for the infantry, the warjacks, which are the big stompy robots, and things like that. So you get any unit of your choice, and then a solo, which is a single model, like a support hero or something like that. So on every turn, you can activate up to 2 entities, and then it passes to your opponent. So you're never going to go with your entire army while your opponent just sits there waiting. It's a fairly fast-playing system from what I've played. And when each model goes, they can move and they can perform an action, which is shoot or do things. And there's 2 very unique things about this game that I think are worth pointing out. First off is there is a resource called Arc, which is this essentially, it's not magic, but it's like sciencey magic. It's scientific magic. And what they do is it's essentially an energy source that certain individuals can harness and use. And in game, you have a pool of 7 points of arc. And you can use this arc to allocate to your troops to give them better abilities, make them more accurate, make them hit harder. You can also use it for them to trigger abilities off of. Additionally, any arc you reserve for yourself is also used to power up what are called ciphers, which are your direct influence on the battlefield, usually some kind of, they're not quite spells, but they're effectively spells. Okay, there's no magic in this universe, but there's science to the point that it looks like magic. So take however you want to take that. And then there's a third use for arc, which ties into the next mechanic that I think is very interesting, is that in Warcaster Neo Mechanika, your army is actually summoned onto the board. Every unit has what's called a reinforcement cost. When you start the game, you get a reinforcement cost of 5 points worth of models on the table, which is usually a squad and a warjack, or a warjack and a solo. It's not much. We're talking, less than 5 models are going to start on the table. All of the rest of them are summoned on through warp gates. You place a warp gate at the end of any of your turns within 5 inches of any friendly model, and then on successive turns you can summon more units through them. Now the catch is you have to allocate some of that arc that you use to power up your troops and your own cipher spells to those warp gates to spawn models through. So you can't just infinitely spawn your entire army. There actually is a limit, although it's a very flexible limit. And your opponent can actually attack the warp gates, close them, knock points off them, and mess with your plan. Last, there's another part to this that's kind of interesting, is that when units die in Warcaster, unless they're a named hero, they're just recycled back into your pool. So you can actually just resummon them later. Obviously, in Universe, they're a different model, a different unit, but this prevents you from being tabled. So if you combine this together, a couple things I'm interested in. First off, this is a very modern take on a Privateer Press war game. When I say modern, in the last few years, there's really been a push towards simpler rules, lower downtime for the players, more activity for you as a player. Your opponent's not doing something and you're waiting 20 minutes. People want a faster gameplay experience. They want to play on a smaller board size. Usually they can fit on their kitchen table. Warcaster Neo Mechanika fits on a 30 by 30 and a 48 by 48, depending on the game size. They want a game that doesn't require a ton of models, and they want to be able to play the game. One of the things that comes up in gaming, like with Warhammer, is getting tabled. Having your opponent's army wiped out. It ends the game, and that's not fun for at least one person involved. So what they did is they basically came out with a Privateer Press miniature game along the lines of War Machine, but that was catered to help address these things and go forward. And I think for the most part they've accomplished it. The rulebook is like 20 pages long, and that's actually fairly short. A lot of it is definitions and information. The actual core rules themselves are fairly simple. They've actually posted on their YouTube channel, Privateer Press Prime, a number of battles. The only complaint I have with the gameplay mechanics at this time is they use proprietary dice, which is something that I very much dislike. Now, I will give them a little bit of credit here, just a little, in that you don't actually need their proprietary dice. You can play this game on D6s without any problems. This is opposed to, say, X-Wing or Star Wars Legion, where you need D8s, and there's like 4 different icons on every one of these, and it gets a little hard to keep track of. With Warcaster Neo Mechanika, there's only 2 kinds of dice, red dice and white dice. And if you want to use D6s, it's a fairly simple conversion. A white dice is a success on a 4+, a red dice is a success on a 2+. If either one rolls a 6, it counts as 2 successes. Congratulations, that's the entire dice mechanic. So while I don't like proprietary dice, at least theirs isn't egregious. You could very easily just use D6s, and it's not going to be a particularly hard conversion. There's not going to be a lot to keep track of. So, continuing with a few of the other points there, the rules are fairly simple. One cool thing about the rules is it encourages very heavy use of terrain, and it's very terrain friendly. So I know one of the complaints against Privateer Press's games in the past has been they're not exactly the most terrain friendly systems. War Machine is not a game you want to fight in a city. The game system almost can't handle that. Whereas Warcaster Neo Mechanika is built to do that from the ground up. In fact, the board densities that people have been trying are on par with Infinity, if not more dense than Infinity boards. And any Infinity player will tell you that their tables are pretty well saturated in terrain. I've actually seen a few Warcaster tables go further than that. So if you like terrain, excellent here. One interesting thing about the gameplay that I also want to point out is because of how the reinforcement mechanic works, you actually don't need to have the same number of entities as your opponent. The way that this game works is there is no point system like you would expect in another miniature game. Instead, it's simply how many units are you allowed to have in reserve. The recommended sizes are 4, 8, and 15. Okay, and it looks like the average 15 seemed to be their original recommendation, but it looks like a lot of people are actually gravitating towards the 8. So let's look at the 8 for a minute. That just means you need 8 entities, 8 warjacks, squads, solos, take your pick. The only requirement is you can't have more than 4 of the same thing. So that's pretty generous at that point. Now, here's the cool thing. Because of how the reinforcement system works, if I have 8 units and you have 6, that's not really that big of a deal. The odds of me getting all 8 on the table are practically nothing. The only thing that those 8 units are giving me is a little bit more flexibility, but you have to pick the stuff in advance, so it's not like your opponent can cater their army to you. And this is interesting because you can't play Warhammer 40k at 2,000 points on one side and 1,500 on the other and expect a good game. You can't play Privateer Press's War Machine at 75 for one player and at 50 points for the other and expect it to be a good game. Yet Warcaster Neo Mechanika does this. I still would recommend having the full allotment, but if you're 1 or 2 units short, it doesn't really strike me as a particularly big deal, especially when you get to the 15. If you get to 15 units and if you show up and say, well, I only have 13, who cares? You're not going to get them all on the table. You can't. The way that the resource mechanic works, both players would effectively have to not engage in the game in order to get all that on the table. So that's really cool. And especially if you're somebody who's very budget conscious or is looking to get into this, you don't have to have that massive initial buy-in. The models per model, they're privateer press metal and resin models, so they're a little bit higher than per model, but you don't need that many. Like I said, 20 to 25 models is about it. And the starter boxes each come with 4 units, so you just buy 2 starter boxes and there's your 8 unit army. Granted, the starter boxes are, I think, $70, which is a little bit high, but you are getting dice, you are getting cards and things like that. So there's a little bit more peripherals in there. But, okay. All right, so we went through the game mechanics, we went through the reinforcements, we talked about terrain. What are the things I think are exciting? So I like the models. I think some of them, a lot of people have looked at the models and have said they look ugly. And I'm just going to say my opinion. I think the models are terribly painted. The execution of the paint jobs is fantastic. The color scheme is horrendous. Having seen the renders of these models and having seen them in alternate color schemes, they're actually really good. Like they're fantastic. But again, I think it's their choice of color scheme that really hurts them on some of these models. Because honestly, there's one faction, the Iron Star Alliance, that I don't completely disagree with the sense that they look like Infinity models from 8 years ago. But I will say that if you look at their renders and see them painted in other color schemes, they actually look a lot better than what you think they do. Or at least that was my impression, because I agree. I looked at the models first time, I said, eh. Now, I'm not somebody who's especially concerned with the models. You'll notice most of my commentary has been gameplay based. I'm a gamer first. If the models look cool, that's a bonus, not a requirement. But while I do agree that these models are not going to light the world on fire, I do think that they're a lot better than people are giving them credit for. My advice is go to the Kickstarter page and look at the renders, and look at what people have done with them past the renders. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The Iron Star Alliance in particular, when I first saw them, I thought they were incredibly terrible looking. But then I saw somebody paint them in this purple and like blue sea green color, and they looked amazing. So I really think these are models that they might not look that great, but I think a lot of it has to do with that paint job. And that can be said about a lot of models. I've heard them compared to Infinity. My advice is look at an Infinity model and paint it if you are not their staff painter. They're not that different, especially when you look at the renders. Anyway, so closing this off, things that interest me. Like I said, I like what I'm seeing with the gameplay. I think that they have done a really good job with trying to hit a number of major points. A couple things before we go. There is customization options. The warjacks are actually fully customizable in terms of weapon loadouts, and they have head options, which is like different rules packages. So I've been pleasantly surprised with how much, even though there's a very small number of things out there, how much tactical thought has to go into this. There's a lot to it. I've been very surprised by that. It is stat card driven, so you'll have stat cards for everything. The cards look perfectly fine. I mean, they get the job done. I've never seen good looking cards, but these aren't bad by any stretch of the imagination. The starter boxes, like I said, are retailing for $70, which is a little bit high in my opinion. I was hoping for $50. But in their defense, it does include 6 models, which you might say, 6 models for $70? That's ridiculously expensive. One of them is the equivalent of like a Space Marine Dreadnought. Okay, it's the equivalent of a Space Marine Dreadnought in like a combat squad of guys, which, compared to what GW puts out is not that far off, especially when you consider the fact that this includes tokens for everything. This includes a full written rulebook, the 24 card deck that you need, a rules reference card, model stat cards for everything, and 11 dice. And these are full-size 16 mil dice from what I've seen. So, yeah, it's a little bit light on models, but you need the gaming aids. Once you get to the individual models themselves and actually look at their pricing, it's not anything to write home about. It's on par with Infinity. It's actually a little bit cheaper in some cases. The average model cost is around $15 for an infantryman. A squad is $25, and the warjacks run between $30 and $40 depending on the size. Which, if you compare it to like Infinity, is about par for the course. It's actually a little bit cheaper, I think. The units in particular. Anyway, I've kind of gone on rambling here. I think I've hit all the high points. Like I said, I'm really excited for this game. I like the mechanics. I like that it's a very terrain-friendly game. It is a sci-fi game, so there's a lot of terrain that's usable. And with the way that its resource mechanic works and its army construction works, I have been shocked how much depth there is to the system. This game came out on Kickstarter. They published the rules. People have been playing this online through like Vassal or Tabletop Simulator mods. And you know what? People have been finding there's a heck of a lot to this system, even though the rules aren't that bad. Side note, the rules are available for free online if you go to privateerpress.com. They're not 100% final. Obviously, they're subject to change before final printing, and the cards are not 100% final, but they're probably pretty close. You will be seeing this on What Game Now. In fact, we will be doing September when my Kickstarter stuff arrives. I got a faction called the Eternus Continuum. And if you look them up, we are going to be painting them as a Nod from Command & Conquer. So red, black, some green lights, and I even have decals of a scorpion tail. And I've also found crystals for the Tiberium, for those of you who are familiar with that universe. We're going full scenic bases. I'm kind of going off the deep end with how cool I want to make these models. And yeah, so you'll see those going on. We'll probably do a video when the Kickstarter arrives. Go through the models, what they look like, go through the assembly. And then also, you guys will see the painting process. And hopefully they'll turn out pretty cool. So with that, guys, I will see you all later.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.